And we are live. So I am super amped to start this. I have wanted, and you know, Bill, excuse me, Doctor. I've got Dr. Acula here making a house call to talk about some vampires today. Once again, he's always good for a call about vampires.
I'm going to slowly turn around and open my bag. You should look into it.
Well, hopefully, it won't. I don't know how to quite respond to that. I'm just going to let that one pass over. But you know, as well, I've been talking for a long time about wanting to touch on these Hammer films.
Yes.
And so finally we are here, and let's just get to it, shall we?
Okay. All right, can't touch this.
All right, stop. HammerTime. All right, so you have, changed aliases on me again. So, like I said last time, you're going to have to start front-loading these things to me. But then again, it is sort of more enjoyable to just pop into the stream and see which incarnation of yourself you're inhabiting today. So
yes.
Now, okay, here we go. 1957.
Right.
Hammer Films begins to create, or they begin to make these loose sort of remakes of the old Universal classics. Yes. You were my first guest on this podcast, and we talked about Todd Browning's Dracula.
Of course.
However, the first movie in Hammer Films is actually The Curse of Frankenstein.
Yep. And
it turns out to be an enormous success, and so they immediately followed up with what they consider to be someone on even par, if not a greater antagonist in horror, which is Dracula.
Yep.
It's 100. Here's something about this movie: 150 directors, writers, and producers for Time Out magazine voted Horror of Dracula as the 65th greatest British film of all time.
It's reaching a little bit, but still, it's venerable, man. It's venerable.
For it, I'd like to flesh that out a bit more as we go along, as to where it fits for its time. You know, where it fits in 1958. Empire magazine listed Lee's Dracula as the 7th greatest horror movie character of all time.
Character, yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Because he brings something completely new and different to the role. Christopher Lee was paid for this role the whopping sum of 750 British pounds.
Yes.
Back in, I think, 1957. And I think by today's estimates, that's about 15,000. About 15,000 today.
Righteous bucks.
Yeah, I guess it's good work if you can get it, but considering the legacy that he left behind, I would definitely say that Sir Christopher Lee was underpaid for his efforts. However, I think that it did lead to the launching of his career.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a much broader sense. You know, we had talked about when we did Lugosi's Dracula, how Lugosi had shunned the kind of horror typecast he saw it as sort of a box and felt that he was rather constricted by it, and he was depressed, and he ended up becoming like a drug addict, and all these different things, fighting off these demons. Whereas Lee and his take on it, I guess, being a World War II vet, suddenly finding himself, behind as the leading man in these horror movies, just kind of chose to embrace it.
Yes.
And, went on to a very storied kind of career and received a British knighthood and, went on to great acclaim, and as we were just talking about in Star Wars and in Lord of the Rings. I think he was the only performer in that movie who had actually met Tolkien.
Yeah, he was definitely the standout.
Yeah.
He was a consummate professional, though. And I think more than embracing the horror thing, I think he embraced, number one, this was a British film, not a Hollywood film.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, you have to remember that they are, at this point, when they make the film, 12 years out of World War II, where London had been just decimated by Nazi bombs. And the fact that England could put it together, not only a studio and distribution, but get a film made, find people who could do this work, and find people with money to back it. That's all an amazing feat. So I think there's a lot more going on with Hammer Films than just, we're doing a Dracula movie.
And they have quite a catalog. Excuse me, I'm getting a lot of feedback here in my audio. There's quite a catalog. There's about a 20-year run that they had there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't just a one-off or two-off kind of thing. They had about 2 decades worth of success in Hammer Films. To some extent, they're still up and running today. I recently saw a movie called, and you'll laugh at this maybe, but I think it's a pretty good movie, called The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe, of all people, the guy who plays Harry Potter. Yeah. And what I think is a pretty passable horror haunted house movie. Okay. And it's in co-production. It's Warner Brothers in co-production with Hammer Films, and it's set, in the UK. So, I'm not sure exactly in what form they're still operating in, but it was good to see that credit in the line. Mm-hmm. I really like that. So, we're talking, easily 50, almost 60 years going, and in one form or another, still running.
Yeah, and I think it all has to do with the luck of the draw. I don't think they expected to be around very much. They knew the odds that they were against, and in 1957, they were shocked that, hey, this Curse of Frankenstein thing is very popular. I don't think when they made the movie, they expected it to be popular, but they had no idea that was the same year that all the Universal films were released for television broadcast. And that's in the United States, the explosion of monster movie mania. It started in 56, 57 with the release of Dracula, Frankenstein, the Werewolf on television for late night and Saturday afternoon replays. And that started just this thirst in American audiences for any kind of horror stuff. So Hammer came around right at the right time, and not only did they score a hit with the Frankenstein movie, but then they capitalized on it perfectly with this series of vampire movies starring Lee.
Yeah, and Peter Cushing.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I'm not mistaken, I think around this time in America, while these movies were airing out in people's homes, I think the types of movies in terms of horror that they were making were more the giant insect type of things. Yep. So these classics sort of strike a I think they strike a deeper chord than watching some nuclear tarantula.
That was the popular B movie.
Yeah.
These Hammer films can be considered B movies. They're sort of a step above the cheap, here's a tarantula attacking a town and there's a fake explosion kind of movies.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Now, I mean, even by today's standards, I watched this, was it yesterday or day before? It still holds up, man. In my mind, it still holds up. It's 81 minutes. It's completely unpretentious. Because of budgeting constraints, they cut a lot away from Stoker's novel.
Oh, absolutely.
All the scenes with the Demeter, he never makes it over to London. I mean, all of this takes place in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Basically a couple of towns over. That's basically where Dracula's making his shift, that kind of thing. But they're fantastic. Hold on a second. We got someone here in the comments. John's here. I guess I'll watch the Phillies game, one horror show for another. Yeah, I would probably stick with the Christopher Lee over the Phillies.
Wait, is that the Cubs still? Is that the Cubs series?
John, is that the Cubs series? Are you there? If you are, let us know. Now, one of the things I noticed in the opening credit is that, and let me backtrack just for a second here. I happen to see The Curse of Frankenstein. I don't know if you ever have. It's an extremely underrated version of Frankenstein. And really who shines in that movie is Peter Cushing.
Absolutely.
Peter Cushing is just, his interpretation of Dr. Frankenstein is just as an evil, evil bastard.
Yes.
I mean, he's just trying to kill people. He is the definition of mad science, but he just goes all the way over to the dark side. With it, and he's just fantastic. And I happened to catch it one of those Halloween months where they're always showing like every night a different horror movie, and I can't remember if it was Turner Classic Movies. It might have been where they had like a week's run worth of Hammer films, and I happened to see it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic. But for this movie, a year later, it isn't Christopher Lee in the starring role as Dracula that gets top billing in the credit. It's Peter Cushing.
Yeah.
Peter Cushing is the leading man in the credit.
I think they wanted to make him the leading man. He was like going to carry this whole series, and he actually does most of it. I don't think they expected Christopher Lee to become as popular as he did. I mean, obviously he was weighed down with the Frankenstein makeup, but I think they're playing off the it's Boris Karloff and
Dwight
Lugosi, but they don't hate each other.
Okay. Yeah, I can kind of see that. Now, we've got Peter Cushing there in a photo with Terrence Fisher. And Terrence Fisher was just a huge... Terrence Fisher is the director of Horror of Dracula. He was the director of Curse of Frankenstein. And he just went on to become one of the major directors for Hammer. He covered the Curse of the Werewolf, which is one of my all-time favorite werewolf movies, and we're going to be covering that next week. I'm very excited about that with Oliver Reed. That's fantastic. He covers the sequel to this movie, Dracula, Prince of Darkness. He covers another Christopher Lee classic, The Devil Rides Out. The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, The Brides of Dracula, which is just one of my all-time favorite Hammer films, which actually has nothing to do with a Dracula, but is a vampire novel. And, of course, the all-time favorite, The Gorgon. He has about 6 credits to his name in terms of directing, but I think 3 of them are Hammer films. Yeah. So he was just the leading director for these. He became like the master of like this British Gothic horror. Yep. And I think it's not a name when people think of horror that they, at least, in a lot of the social media feeds that I'm involved in, talking about horror, you're not hearing this name nearly enough.
Yeah, that's just...
he gets overlooked.
It's these movies, well, the movies themselves have always been underrated for what they were. So there wasn't that focus on who the director is and the producer and all that like we do now. It's mostly the stars that they would push. So this guy was probably really good at bringing in productions under budget and on time, more than anything else.
Well, I'm sure, with any director and any production company, I'm sure those are valued attributes. Yeah. But the fact that he happened to make a lot of kick-ass, scary movies, for me, is the selling point.
Yeah, so much right, more right than he did wrong in each one of those movies.
Now, absolutely. I mean, the difference with Hammer films, they hit with a much harder punch.
Yes.
Than the Universal Classics. The Universal Classics were these understated, sort of, dramatic kind of things, with We talked about in Browning's Dracula, these actors are just coming off of the silent film era, so they've got these overly dramatic and overly flamboyant performances, as opposed to Lugosi, who seems to be the only person that has any real presence in there. But with Hammer, it starts right up from the beginning when you go to the opening credits and you hear that tremendous score.
Excellent music. And,
yeah.
And they lay down the gauntlet, because in the first couple of frames you've got blood everywhere, which is something you never saw in any of the original Universal films.
Absolutely.
All the deaths are off screen, where this one is like, hey, guess what we're going to do? And they got this bright red blood just all over the grave, which
right in your face, yeah. Which implies that, there's probably somebody dead and bleeding hanging over Dracula's coffin just to sort of drip blood, onto the top of his stone. But what really got me was this introduction scene where they start out at the castle with that tremendous score. There's the dragon right there in your face, letting you know that, we're going right at it from the get-go. Here was the introduction, for Todd Browning's Dracula, which is much more of I don't know exactly. I mean, it's no disrespect to Todd Browning and what Universal did with Dracula, and for its time, it was something. But when you compare that, and look at about, 25 years later, that you've evolved all the way to this with that sort of hard font right there in the production and that very bold score. And like you said, blood right there. That was always sort of, you never saw any blood in any of the Universal movies. But here in the introduction and the opening credits, they're letting you know what you're in store for.
Yeah. And the strength of the Hammer movies is that it was a visual look that no one had seen before. And that's one of the things that it got right, is that not only are the characters scary, the plot is scary, all that, but you also have this look, which is scary. You see the Gothic castles, you see the peasants in their Eastern European costumes. It all just spells horror, stuff that at least Americans were not seeing, and it was still exotic. Europe was still an exotic place.
And they're not trying any sort of bold, they're not pulling any triggers with special effects. It's all an issue of performance. I mean, in the castle scenes for me in Dracula movies are very important, because that sort of sets the tone for, what kind of movie I'm going to get. Be it from Lugosi's, where they had the effects with the spider web, or how vast it is, and, we talked about how small Renfield seems, walking in there, he's just going to get consumed by this place. Here, they're not really doing any of that. They're not really paying that much attention to the castle at all. It's just sort of based on the presence of the actors. And, certainly, Christopher Lee, who is hitting you with a completely different look than Lugosi did. I mean, that Christopher Lee, an imposing man, probably at about 6'4". He's sort of playing the strong silent type. There's not an overabundance of lines. I know one of the complaints, or regrets that he had was that he was never able to do a Dracula production that was closer to what Stoker's novel was. He always wanted to do sort of an authentic, sort of interpretation. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he has nothing to feel bad about. I mean, what he's left us here is just an amazing body of work. I own so many of these Dracula, these Hammer Draculas that, and I'm happy and proud to pop them in at any time and just watch. It was a real treat yesterday to pop in the Horror of Dracula and just sit down and chill for 80 minutes and, just enjoy. And so, we're talking 60 years later, still having that impact. That's not easy to say for a horror movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about Christopher Lee's interpretation of Dracula is that it set the pace for all future Draculas. We
You're
can say that about Lugosi, but I don't think that's actually true. Lugosi was sort of a romantic figure. Christopher Lee took it and turned it into a monster.
Yeah.
The fangs, you have the red eyes, you have the, like you said, the 6'4" imposing look. You got the blood for the first time. He's just a monster, and all the tropes that we take for granted about vampires moving forward right up till today come from his performance and his interpretation. These set the pace for all future vampire movies, whether it's Blade or what have you.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, look at that. That's that brings me back to a bit of an anecdote. My parents, my mother actually got me started in horror movies with the Universal Classic, then going on with Hammer, and then on the weekends you would have that character Dr. Shock.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Shock on Saturday afternoon, and then after that, I think he graduated to Creature. That we graduated to Creature double feature on Saturdays, where you would get two back to back, and you would see all different types of movies.
Yep. Stella, don't forget Stella, Saturday Night Dead.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, she was like the poor man's Elvira or something like that. Yeah.
Picked up right when Dr. Shock and Svengoolie had left in favor of karate movies. And then that was where you got your horror fix, was instead of Saturday afternoon, it was Saturday night at 1 a.m.
Well, what ended up happening here, though, I noticed, is that not only, and we talked about this with Lugosi too, you're right, he was sort of a romantic character, whereas Lee was a monster, but there was a huge degree, here's the anecdote. My parents went to go see this in the movie theaters with my aunt at the time, my brother's sister, and for 1958, if you see this in 1958, I don't think anybody had ever seen anything like that before. That must have scared the living hell out of everybody.
Yes.
And actually, when they went to drop my aunt back off, she made my dad go in the house and inspect the house to make sure that nobody was in there hiding under the bed or anything like that. Fully grown woman. I think he was older than she was older than my dad. But no, Dad had to go in there and make sure that Christopher Lee wasn't hanging out in the laundry room or something like that. So this had a real impact on people. We watch it for an entertainment value, and there is a bit of a scare value in there. But for 1958, this must have been terrifying in the same way that Karloff and Lugosi were terrifying in the 30s.
Yes,
just amazing. But I say all that to say this. In terms of, there's not a romantic element here, but there's a highly sexualized element, I thought.
Well, yes. These movies, not only were they going for straight up horror, they were also tit and ass all over the place. And I'll tell you what, Christopher Lee is not only a vampire, he is a pimp.
Yeah, he is a ladies' man, mother. Yeah.
He snaps like that. He goes from genteel, proper count to I'm gonna beat this bitch. Yeah. In the first scene with the first wife, with Harker, he's just roughing her up, and that must have been so shocking in 1957, 58 to see that. Not only that, but you're seeing cleavage.
Yeah, you've got her in here, and she's only listed as Vampire Woman in the credits, but her real name, I did a little research, was Valerie Gaunt. Mm-hmm. And in this movie, she's about 25 years old.
Yep.
Okay, so you can't really tell from this picture, but she's got a nice little figure there, and she was just bursting out of that top. Mm-hmm. In 1950, even by today's standards, she's still bursting out of that top. So you've got this 25-year-old, highly sexualized, woman, and the guy they have playing Harker. It was an interesting contrast that all the men who are sort of the hero characters were sort of these buttoned up, kind of stiff British, kind of fellows, with their hair parted on the side, and they're sort of paired off against these, super sexualized, the super sexualized woman in here.
Right.
And they just don't have much of a chance.
No, not at all. It's very prim and proper British, even though they're supposed to be Transylvanians. It is so British in the way that they all perform.
Yeah.
But having that the women like this, has the exotic of Eastern Europe.
Well, it is the epitome of the femme fatale. Literal. It is the literal femme fatale. I mean, you're some button down, Oxford educated, stiff. And this woman just comes and starts pawing on you, and she's dressed like that, and she's breathing real heavy, and her chest is just like bulging out of that thing. Nobody can stand up to that. And so it becomes the archetype. I think you're right, not only in how Dracula was portrayed, but in how the brides were portrayed.
Yes, and every single movie that was almost like a Bond girl,
yeah,
new vampire wife.
Well, every
single time.
Here's some photos of what we got in 1931 with Lugosi. For 1931, again, I have no disrespect to Lugosi or Todd Browning or any of these performances, but, there you go. Right. And they are sort of scary in a George Romero kind of way, like black and white George Romero, that sort of deep makeup-y kind of around the eyes kind of look. They look dead.
Like flappers.
Yeah, they look dead. Now, from there, you go to this. So, that's a horse of a different color right there.
The intent color.
Yeah, and then, probably you start to get to around the 90s where you get to what Coppola did, where the women, you've got like a 25-year-old Monica Bellucci.
Yes.
Who just kind of rises out of the bed.
Yeah.
And nobody's standing up to that.
Yeah.
Or you could go all the way, and I like this version of Dracula when Wes Craven did those Wes Craven Presents kind of movies where he was the executive producer for Dracula 2000.
Okay.
With Gerard Butler as Dracula. Yeah. You've got Jerry Ryan as from who was 6 of 9.
Yeah.
She is one of the brides, along with the woman on the left who's just stunning. I can't remember her name. But it all starts with Valerie Gaunt.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
hard left turn with Kate Beckinsale, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll
leather and latex.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll get into the underworld, because I always say underwater nowadays because I'm still sort of stuck on that movie. But that was a decent vampire flick. And it had a decent cast, and it was a pretty good story. But
so here you got to go from the wives to what Dracula wants, which is the prim and proper wife and daughter, and they're the victims that he wants to turn into those highly sexualized wives.
Yeah, he wants to. He wants the Madonna. He wants to dirty up the Madonna.
Yeah.
I think for him, in this particular version, thank God, it's not about, 500-year-old lost loves and, candlelit dinners and, all that. I think it's almost utilitarian.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in this movie, Harker is playing it undercover. Like, he comes into the castle taking the job as the librarian, because again, he's not traveling from London. He's traveling from like a couple of hours carriage ride over. Mm-hmm. But he understands who Dracula is, and he's there to destroy him. And all he really manages to do is to destroy Valerie Gaunt. He kills her. And so I think Dracula's motivations really are no more than to replace her,
right,
with someone else.
Right. Anybody who's available.
And so, you're absolutely, I think your character. Wife. Go ahead, say that again.
Just replace her with anybody, but hey, why not make it Harker's wife? Or girlfriend, or whoever she is.
I think I think the word you used correct. I think the word you used was absolutely correct. He's a pimp.
Yes, absolutely.
Just give me another one. Give me another one. It doesn't really matter. I got no particular attachment to any of them. Just, get next.
He's doing that through the centuries.
Next, next. And so, and she literally is the femme fatale. She's the one who bites Harker.
Yes.
It's not Dracula. It's not Dracula. I thought that was interesting. It's her. So, suddenly Dracula is on the lookout for a new wife, or a new woman in his house. And we shouldn't skip over this. We almost get to a point where Harker succeeds in killing Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, one of the scariest scenes in that movie is when he realizes that Dracula's got the drop on him, and he doubles up behind him and closes the door from like the high ground up there. And Harker just knows his ass is just cooked, man.
Yep.
He's just I remember watching that for the first time as a little kid, and it just scared the daylights out of me. I'm like, what's going to happen to him? Nothing good. Nothing good. But then you suddenly see Dracula. But then we start to also introduce the counterbalance, because we start to meet, and this is what I thought was a nice contrast from the Universal classic, Peter Cushing.
Yep.
Peter Cushing is another alpha.
Yeah, he's not some old doddering guy with his books. This is a man of action.
Science. Yeah. Science and a little bit of religion. He's not. He understands. The Christian element here. He speaks very plainly. He doesn't talk in riddles. The way he goes into that inn and just starts, talking to all those people, you're like, what's going on with all this garlic? They're like, oh, nothing, sir, nothing. And he just gets right to the point. So he's not stiff in the way that Harker was, or Lucy's brother is, that kind of thing. You got someone in this interpretation who's equal to the task.
Right.
And
he's an action hero, basically.
Yeah.
If this movie was made today, I would get like Jason Statham or something like that. Someone with a little bit of oomph.
Not Hugh Jackman?
Heck no.
Within 10 minutes of Van Helsing's introduction, he's already killed his friend Harker.
Yes.
Within 10 minutes. He completely...
Because he had to, don't you understand?
Oh, I get it. I completely get it. But it just sets the tone that this isn't somebody who's going to hesitate.
Right.
He's just going to do what he has to do and, make it through the rest of his day as best he can.
This guy's a third man. He's got to get the job done.
Now, he also is another character who has been recurring throughout Hammer. And he's in a number of Dracula movies, playing the foil.
Of course.
One of my favorite Dracula movies, again, and I mentioned it earlier in the Terrence Fisher list, is Brides of Dracula.
Right.
Which is not per se, Vlad Tepes' story. It's not a Dracula story, but it's a vampire story. And Peter Cushing is the foil. I don't think he's Van Helsing. He plays another doctor. But there's a scene in there where I believe the lead vampire bites him, and Peter Cushing pulls a hot, within a couple of seconds of getting bit, pulls a hot branding iron out of a fireplace and brands himself right in the neck.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the most. It's just like one of the most hardcore scenes I've ever. He doesn't even blink, He just pulls it right out. And gives it to himself right in the neck, and you're like, holy shit! Peter Cushing is like invincible, man. He just won't be stopped. And it's for all the complaints that we had about Todd Browning, where the flamboyant, you got maybe two performers who are worthwhile, which was Dwight Fry and Lugosi. Everybody here is entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it is the buttoned up stiff upper lip British guy being completely undone by the sexualized women, that sort of thing. Everybody sort of plays their part. Now, of course, he's going to go through Lucy, She doesn't stand much of a chance, and you can see she kind of is she's got the collar bitten all the way up to her neck, and everything's buttoned up very tightly. And then you've got Mina, who he's already started to work on, and by the time he gets to the scene where you see her get bit for what may or may not be the first or second time, she's already starting to loosen up a little bit. Her clothing is, more revealing, this sort of thing.
100% sexier than Lucy, I gotta say.
Yeah.
She comes across a lot better as an almost vampire.
Well, I mean, I did just like I said, a microscopic level of research, and she said that when you find out that she gets bit, there's a scene where she comes in the next morning and she's all buttoned up.
Yep.
Because they don't want her to see. They don't want Cushing to see her neck. She doesn't want that, and she asked Terrence Fisher, "How do you want me to play it? Do you want me to be timid? Do you want me to be, brazen and kind of wild? How do you want me to do this?" And he literally told her, "I want you to play it like you just had the best sex of your life all night. Walk into the house like you just had the best sex of your life all night long."
Yeah, with Dracula, who's a pimp.
Yeah. And that's exactly how, that's in keeping with everything that we've been saying all along. And that he is just, he's not only is he a monster, he's also like this, sort of sexual monster who just sort of sexualizes all these women. And there's a couple of scenes, I think, with her where it looks like he's just like he's about to, mount her pretty much. I mean, it's 1958, but it looks like, they're a decade or so away from being able to film that, in which case it would have been an Andy Warhol movie, but nobody wants to see those.
Foreshadowing for the whole light pornography that movies became in the early 70s.
Yeah, and certainly the gratuitous nudity that we got in the 80s, where I struggle to think now of a movie I've seen within the past 15 years that's had nudity.
Yeah, right.
It's all but gone. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a movie that I've seen, and we were just talking about the
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that'd be about it. We were just talking about the Critical Drinker and his commentary on Scarlett Johansson now, wanting to play a conservative now that she's, not 21 anymore.
Right.
That sort of thing. But I mean, we grew up in an era where, nudity was a foregone conclusion, especially in a horror movie.
Heck yeah. It wasn't a horror movie if there wasn't titties.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you got killed.
Yeah.
That was one of the rules, the classic rules that always got broken. You had sex.
Yeah, it was always the bad kids who got killed first.
Yeah, Camp Crystal Lake or whatever. I'm not exactly a Friday the 13th fan, but I think I did make it to the third movie. And, I seem to remember some sort of harpoon coming up from under the bed or over the bed or something like that. And then there were always like the C and D horror movies of the 80s, which were just, nothing but gratuitous. I think I once saw a movie about a woman who had a pair of, like, her breasts became carnivorous. They turned into monsters or something like that. I seem to be, huh?
I never saw that.
I think she was like a Playboy playmate, and I guess she must have gotten a role in like this horrific horror movie or something like that. So it was an opportunity, that was what was working for her was her body, and her looks. And so it was about, she would seduce men, and then her like breasts would turn into monsters, and they would like kill people or something like that. So, yeah, okay.
So let's get to the scariest part of this movie for me when I was a little kid. And this is one of the things that always hooked me about Christopher Lee movies, but it has nothing to do with Christopher Lee. It was when Lucy first starts to show her fangs, and she's taking the little girl out into the graveyard.
The cemetery, yeah.
Oh, my God. That was the scariest part ever for me.
Really?
That hooked me. I had a habit of sort of ignoring the beginning, most of the first act of movies, and then getting sucked into the second act when things got really interesting. And that is what hooked me on this movie, was you see Lucy she goes from, the innocent pigtails, the cross around her neck, and next thing you know, she's got fangs and she's going after a little girl.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's part of the Dracula canon. I think it's the lady in white or something like that. You read about that in the stories, and she does go after a little girl or something like that. All right, that didn't get me so much. I mean, like I said, I think the scariest part for me was when Dracula doubles back on Harker and traps him down there. But we shouldn't mention how graphic this was for its time.
Yes.
When Peter Cushing hits her with that cross, it's like a branding iron.
Yeah, that is a great scene with the burn on her face. Excellent job, and that is totally gratuitous violence for its time. And they did it later in Salem's Lot, and you're like, I know where that came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Except they were tongue depressors. It wasn't quite as good as when Peter Cushing did it, and he had the rosary with the cross that was like a foot long.
Yes.
Like he wasn't screwing around with any small cross. He wrote this big thing that shined like everywhere, like it would reflect off moonlight or anything. He gave that little girl that rosary, and the cross was almost as big as she was.
Yeah, he's like, this pretty thing. Cross.
She's probably got a cramp in her neck. Jesus Christ, this thing is heavy, mister. Oh, for God's sake.
She's carrying it around like Flavor Flav.
Now, Dracula is such a badass in this movie. He's actually staying in the basement of the woman that he's biting. He's staying in their house. He's living in the basement. He just comes up the stairs while they're all outside, trying to protect her, and he just rolls right up the steps.
Heck yeah, because it's his house now.
Exactly.
Even so far as to start digging his new wife a grave.
Yep.
That was the baddest part of the whole thing. He's just like, they're doing their thing, and he's just digging and looks up like, oh, what do you want? I'm busy.
He tries to bury her alive. There's no sentimental attachment at all. He could give a fuck. It's just you're in his way. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it. You're just in his way. So if you're not in his way, he's probably not even going to notice you. That kind of thing. But if you get in his way, it's going to be a problem. I just think at no time in this does Peter Cushing seem afraid, which isn't a problem because it's Peter Cushing. It's Peter Cushing. So, you don't want to see Peter Cushing be afraid. But that scene, man, at the end, I mean, and this is how they open up Dracula, Prince of Darkness. With that end scene from Horror of Dracula where he's running Dracula up those stairs, man.
Yep.
He has Dracula on the move and just, once he...
He's as close to Chuck Norris as a British guy could get in 1958.
Yeah, if he had put him in some sort of judo or like a triangle choke or something like that, or put him in a rear naked and because Dracula almost strangles him to death, and Peter Cushing just he plays it dead.
The way he takes him out is so good. He fakes death, throws a right hook, and then does that jump to get the shade off.
Where he leaps, he just leaps. He looked like who is that guy that used to play for the 76ers who used to dunk and he broke the basket a number of times? They called Darryl Dawkins. He looked like the old Darryl Dawkins from like the 76ers where he just grabs both handfuls of the curtain, he just pulls it down, and he even falls down on the ground. He like jumps so hard. So he's like completely jumping for his life.
Yep.
And
this is the best scene, man. It's such good effects for what they had to work with when that happens.
Yeah, well, I mean the disintegration at the end, and he doesn't exactly melt. He just kind of withers away in the sunlight. But I mean, there really is, and I can't stress this enough. There's a minimal amount of effects in this movie.
Right.
There's very few. I think Lugosi's movie had more triggers pulled than in this movie.
They didn't try a lot, and you know what? They didn't do any bats in this one either. which would have been super hard to pull off. So they just ignored it.
I think as the series went more and more down the line, I think they did get into bats. I mean, because he played this role a number of times.
My favorite opening was when they regenerate. I don't want to spoil it for the future movie, but when he's regenerated, I think it's the third or fourth movie, when the bat spits up blood on the pile of ashes and he's reborn. That's just the shit.
Well, mine is in the very next movie, because my favorite movie in the Dracula series with, Christopher Lee for Hammer is the next one, Dracula, Prince of Darkness.
Okay. From the grave.
Where they kill that guy, because of course Dracula has a servant in this one, a loyal servant, and he strings that guy up and just cuts his throat right over all the ashes.
Yes.
And he regenerates right out of that, and. Dracula's pretty badass. This is
Clive Barker stole that for his mattress regeneration scene.
Mattress regeneration?
Yeah, you don't remember when in Hellraiser, the guy's throat is cut, the blood is covering the mattress, and the demon is
vaguely
remind me totally of it's totally stolen from Hammer stuff.
I don't remember too much. I haven't seen Hellraiser in so long. I remember that I wasn't terribly impressed. I don't know. The one I remember from Clive Barker is Lord of Illusions.
Okay.
With Scott Bakula, and that's just a freaky movie. Because Clive Barker's kind of into that freaky deaky kind of horror, and it's got excessive pain, and it's got
they're all freaky, but in this scene, they take a guy who's crazy and sees bugs all over his arms, and they hand him a razor, and he wants to cut the bugs that don't exist, but it winds up cutting his arms open and bleeding everywhere. It's a crazy, crazy scene.
Maybe at some point I'll get back around to watching that. When I see it, I mean, and I could be wrong, because I think a couple of weeks ago we were talking about The Devil's Rejects, and you said, well, you got to get back on House of a Thousand Corpses.
Yes.
So, maybe this is the same thing and I've just been wrong. Usually 85% of the time when I have that vibe, I'm right. But, there is the other 15%. Okay, so maybe I'll take a look at it again.
Clive Barkers are hard to watch, but I'm just saying that scene totally reminds me of the scene in Dracula, and I think it's totally copied from Hammer.
It wouldn't surprise me. There's certainly worthwhile material to borrow out of that, and it's just good stuff.
Like I said, man, they wrote the book on all the future vampire movies, and everyone stole from those Hammer films.
It's a shame that in many cases, I mean, kind of what they're known for are the Dracula movies. There were so many others that were good, and one of my favorite werewolf movies, and like I said, we're going to cover it next week, is Curse of the Werewolf. That movie scared the hell out of me.
Heck yeah!
When I was a little kid, and when Oliver Reed was a werewolf in real life.
I could never not see him as a werewolf in anything he's ever been in.
Yeah, even when he was in the Three Musketeers.
Yes.
Back in the 70s, he was still that werewolf, changing in that jail cell where that guy's trapped in there with him while he's changing. Oh, man, that scared the living daylights out of me.
Heck yeah.
So, I mean, I know people, and I don't think we have much of an audience for this one, unfortunately. Maybe they'll catch it on the replay. But I know a lot of people that I've talked to that are doing these, horror platforms and, creating content, who told me they haven't seen any Hammer yet.
What?
And I'm just like, yeah, that's what I said. I'm like, what? I'm like, stop whatever you're doing. Take whatever you have in the Blu-ray player out of the Blu-ray player, and just, I mean, in these movies on Amazon, I should have brought my copies. They're incredibly inexpensive to buy hard copies of.
Yes, buy the Anchor Bay re-releases. They're not too expensive, and they're beautiful, beautifully restored.
I got if this wasn't live, I'd do it. I'd get up and pull out. I got a box set of like 8 or 10 Hammer movies for like $16 on Amazon on DVD. with Curse of the Werewolf, Brides of Dracula. I have like four movie set of Christopher Lee. I have a couple of those. But I talk to so many people that, are creating horror content who tell me either they're still working on the Universal classics and they haven't gotten the Hammer yet. And I'm like, what? Like, how is this possible? This is terrible.
You've never watched Star Trek or you've never watched Caddyshack. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if you've made it to the end of this episode on the replay, get yourself some Hammer in your life.
Yeah, man, what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, I would buy them. I own them. Like, I know that those physical copies are mine. If at some point, for some reason they wear out, I'll buy them again because they're that good. I was raised on these. They're better. There's so much. Go ahead.
I think you can find them all free, at least right now. I think it's on IFC. If not, maybe the Sundance Channel. But I clicked by them and it had all the Apes and all the Hammer vampire movies. So go seek them out. There's no excuse. They're there for you.
Do it. Just put down whatever else you're watching, whatever sequel you're watching, and, sit down and, get some Hammer in your system because it's necessary. It's part of the foundation of horror.
Yes.
As much as Universal and, maybe, Murnau's, Nosferatu is down there at the very bottom. And then a little bit later, 10 years later, you have the Universal classics. There weren't that many Universal classics. There were like maybe 5 movies. That sort of set the tone.
For you, man.
Huh?
Where would you put this one?
In terms of Hammer, or what do you mean?
In terms of all-time great, I don't know, vampire movies or just horror movies in general. Like, it's foundational. Let's say there's a top 50. Where are you putting it? Or even a top 100?
Oh, I'd say top 20 easily.
Okay.
I would say that because of its impact.
Mm-hmm.
Of its impact. I'd say top 20. Top 20.
Okay.
If I really just wanted to put my foot in it, I would say top 10. But then I'd have to kind of. Huh?
That's a bold statement, but I can see that.
Yeah, so could I. It would take
do a top 10 show.
I would, yeah. I'm gonna have to sit down. I would sit down and like write that out, because at the top I'd have like The Exorcist, I'd have Alien, I'd have newer movies like Hereditary, I'd have some of the more modern ones in there. Jaws, I'd have Jaws there.
Sure. Don't give it away. We'll set the rules. We'll make the lists, and then we'll discuss.
Yeah, I think that needs to happen. That definitely needs to happen. But I am so glad that we have finally, I think 6 months or so into this, finally gotten around to starting to address some of these Hammer classics. I didn't want to do like a one-off. Hey, we're going to do a Hammer film, and
we could do more, man. I'll do a Risen from the Grave any day.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've done enough for this. We've gone almost 53 minutes, which is almost as long as the movie. And it's time well spent. If you see this on the replay, please like the video, subscribe if you think it's worthy. I'll be back tomorrow with John. And we're going to discuss one of my all-time favorites from 1987, Angel Heart.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Yeah. There aren't that many voodoo movies out there. Mm-hmm. And this one is top shelf.
Yes.
It's top shelf stuff. And that's the kind of stuff we want to cover here. We'll be back next week at the very least with Curse of the Werewolf. The rest of it I'm still kind of working out. But Doctor, thank you for stopping in and making this house call one more time. And stick around after the outro, okay?
Okay.
All right, man.